to give it power. And to have a steam engine, you have to produce lots of steam. I mean, you do it in a small way with your kettle at home, but machines use a lot more than that. So these three boilers here are actually fire at the bottom, water in the middle, and a big tank at the top there, the big silver one there, that collects all the steam. Now, if you had an old steam engine, a locomotive that pulled trains around, they had a big tube up the front where that round bit of the engine used to be. The fire in there, a little tank of water on top there, and that had to start up ahead of time because it was very, very slow getting moving. In that kind of setup, you had to boil the entire tank full of water before you got any steam and before you got pressure enough to make the wheels go around. And that used to take between an hour and a half and 2 hours. When these boilers were made, they'd come up with a new idea, and what they did was split up the water into little containers or pipes. So they're all 8-hour pipes about that big. Now see the special wiggly crack up there? That lets the flame come up the crack there and wrap around each little bit of water, which means that it boils very, very fast, and it can have up to working pressure in 20 minutes, as opposed to 2 hours. So that's what all the modern ships have nowadays, water tube boilers. When these were first started, they were burning coal that came up from Collie, but after a couple of years they did their sums and they found out it was just too expensive. It wasn't too far to come from Collie to here, but from Collie up to number 8 pump station, which is nearly 600 kilometres away, when they add up the costs of getting it up there, they said, we can't afford it. That's when they started using timber. So they had foresters go out in the forest here, mark the trees, so they didn't take any good ones that you could use for furniture. And they would cut up these 2 metre lengths, mostly of jarrah and red gum, a little bit of shear. Then the stoker, who worked in the boiler room here, would pick up each of those logs and throw them in, close the door, walk along, stoke the next one, and so on. And he'd have to shift, well, the people who did that shifted about 8 tonnes of heavy, heavy, hard wood. It was not only hard, it was splintery. See this one here? Imagine what that would do with your hands. Of course, gloves weren't issued in those days. That was only for sissies or wusses. So they made up their own little mitts out of a tube in a truck tyre. And that put onto their hands like so, enable them to pick up the stuff and not tear their hands to bits, which is quite a good idea. And they called them flippers. And you're thinking about swimming, aren't you? No, they're called flippers because when it came to morning tea time, they could flip that over, pick back up the sandwich, eat it, flip over and go on without missing a beat. So they kept themselves very busy. At the end of each 8 hours, because there are 3 teams of people working in here, at the end of each shift, they'd rake out ash with a big long-handled shovel here, take the wheelbarrow and dump about 2 barrow loads of ash out inside in the bush. Now that isn't a problem because wood ash has a sort of natural fertiliser called potash in it, and it's good for the environment. If you're burning coal, you have sulphur and all kinds of nasties in it, and that just isn't good. So in a way it was a good thing we shifted to wood. We're going to step through the door here and turn left. What I'd like you all to do is split into 2 halves. About half of you on the right hand wall, half on the left hand side, and a gap down the middle. That's right down to the blue light that you see. Through the door, turn left. That's it. Half on either side.
Half on either side. Stay with it.
Yep.
Half on either side.
Pretty cool.
It's what?
That's it. Just imagine there's a train coming through the middle.
Train coming through the middle. Quick, look out.
Thank you. We can come a bit closer.
Come down. Yeah. Come down.
Don't forget to leave your cap down in the middle so you can all see. Now, what looks like a big blue lightning flash is really an aerial picture of our dam. And there's our dam wall up here. When it's full, this is about 10 kilometres long. And of course in the bad years when we don't get much rain, it shrinks quite a bit. The blue line that you can see running up the middle there, if you could just step back, thank you. That's an aerial picture of what the pipeline would look like on its way to Kalgoorlie and the big tank on Mount Charlotte. Now the white lights that are in the floor there are 8 of those. Each one of those is a pumping station. And you notice that they're not evenly spaced.
Melch.
Big one there, big space there, little space there, medium, and down here, two almost touching one another. Now that's because we're at the bottom of a very deep valley, and then on top of that we have the Darling Range Hills, and number one pumping station simply couldn't lift the water that high. So what it does is it lifts it up about 60% of the way into number two, which was just down the road, about 1 kilometre away. That's why they're so close. Then number two pumped up enough pressure to lift over the top of the hills. And this is where the sneaky thing starts. Once the water got over the top of the hill, it flows by gravity downhill 160 kilometres away to the next pumping station without any push by the pumps. At Cunningham, where there's another set of hills, they pump up just enough pressure to get over the top of the hills, and it runs downhill to Meriden, 200 kilometres away, without any push by the pumps. It's a real sneaky, clever, simple idea. And it was so easy that the engineers all said, oh, it never worked. But we know that it did. Between here and Kalgoorlie, it goes up 1,200 feet or 400 metres high. If you've ever been to Kalgoorlie, you probably think of it in terms of being flat country, but it's not. It's quite high. And this was the first time in the world that anyone had ever lifted water that high. Still is. The highest one. Now, we'll go move out of here straight into the engine room.
I'll do part one and this is part one. This is part one. This is part one, and part two is going to be the next one, and part three is going to be the next one.
Gone away for holidays, but the second week of school, just go through. Second week of school, parents are coming.
Is that everybody? Okay, this is one of the three big engines that were here. It started life as the O'Connor Museum and the Water Corporation ran it. Now the National Trust has looked after it. So we've taken out a couple of the engines. You can see they've got some concrete over there and over there.
Guys, can you all come in nice and
Come in
close
nice and
as
close
you all
here.
listen
Remember,
to it?
penguins all. Now, these engines ran here for about 50 odd years. They're old and slow moving. In fact, they only moved at about 20 strokes a minute, something like just like that, and very quiet too. And the engines themselves are all this black section over there, a dangerous place. All that section that's painted black is the engine, and the engine is lying down on its side like this, so that it's pumping horizontally. All the green section down here, they're the pumps. And if you look at this great big red bolt here, one on the other side, the two of them are bolted together. So whatever the steam engine does, the pump has to do the same thing. And so it just works backwards and forwards like that, pumping out. They shifted, in the old measurement, at 1.6 million gallons. It's about 6 million litres a day, each of them. So it's a huge amount of water. And they would have gone on for another couple of 100 years before they finally broke down, because they just simply don't wear out. In the 1950s, the technology in electric motors got very, very clever, and while these could generate 300 horsepower, so too could an electric motor about that big. And that's when they decided they'll start using electric motors and centrifugal pumps instead. Otherwise, these could have gone on forever. Now, these engines have been around, steam engines have been around for about 120 years at this time, and all the bad ones have gone broke. And when the engineers decided